When it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2, there's already a ton of options between carrying cases as well as protective covers for the Nintendo Switch 2. However, one of the downsides is oftentimes when you put a protective cover on the Switch 2, it makes it too bulky to fit into some of the conventional carrying cases that are on the market. And this can lead to a compromised experience and ultimately just annoyance between having to put that cover or that case back onto the Switch 2 every time you're taking it out of its carrying case. And that's where a company like COOWPS comes in, and they've developed an all-in-one solution. And what that is essentially a protective cover for the Switch 2, but also a carrying case that can attach to this protective cover. And one of the coolest things is this carrying case slash protective cover doesn't compromise some of the key features that you would expect from your Switch 2, like being able to dock it and being able to seamlessly travel and use it between your house and on the go. And so in this video, I'm going to go over this protective case system, as I'm going to call it, that COOWPS has sent me, what I think about it, some of the great features and problems that they've solved, and some of the things that make it a little frustrating. So let's take a look. So to start, I just want to highlight that the box that COOWPS sent me that this device is packaged in my opinion, is incredibly premium. And I don't just mean like it looks good aesthetically, but the weighting to it, the way they packaged everything for this, even with all their branding and the different branding on the paper that's inside this box, I just thought looked really high end. And it really made me feel like this case itself wasn't just some generic case coming off of Amazon, but something that this company put a lot of time and effort into making feel like a truly premium purchase. Now, taking everything out, you basically get 4 core pieces. In other words, you get the face cover for traveling, which I'll get into in a bit. You get the 2 Joy-Con covers for the sides that detach, essentially. And then you get the actual body case for the Switch 2 that protects the actual Switch 2 itself. You also get inside the box, which I thought was a nice little touch, a little cleaning rag as well to clean off the Switch 2 before you put this in. Again, just a little extra thing that I'm not gonna say was necessary, but it was a cool extra. Now, snapping this all together, everything went together pretty easily. Now, I found the Joy-Con protective case portion was a little bit more finicky, but once I kind of figured out how it slid on, I thought it worked well. One thing to highlight, however, is if you don't put those Joy-Con covers on essentially perfectly, it will limit the trigger, like the R and the ZR buttons and L, R, and R or L buttons from being pressed down fully. So you really have to get this on snug and tight on the side of the Joy-Cons, or else you may feel like it's going to restrict or even limit the way those bumper buttons feel. Now, once I got that adjusted and figured out how to get that on essentially perfectly, and I recommend keeping the Joy-Cons on the Switch 2 while you're doing that, then I put on the actual body cover or case portion for the Switch 2. This felt like I had to put a bit of pressure into really getting it to click in and snap on, but once I got it on, I felt like it felt very snug and fit very tightly to the Switch 2 in a good way. And out of the gate, one of the things that I was a little, I'm not gonna say skeptical, but a little thrown off by, was on the back of the Joy-Con grips, you have these basically protruding out handles almost for the Joy-Cons. And I was a little skeptical that this would feel comfortable when I was playing. However, I've been playing quite a bit with this case on, with these Joy-Con grip cases on as well. And I actually really like it, and like it so much so that I prefer this to playing it naked, essentially, where these aren't on there. Having those actual jut out grips like that really make this feel a lot more comfortable on the Switch 2, and ergonomically, it makes the Switch 2 feel just a lot more like a dedicated gaming system when I'm using it. Now, one thing I do want to highlight is I am a frequent user, though, of pulling these off and using the pack-in docking controller thing, I don't know what you want to call that, for the Switch 2, the device that puts these two together to make it essentially into a controller. These are not compatible with it, but I realized that a lot of the times the reason I liked using that way, especially when I'm on my couch, was because I found this kind of not so comfortable when these were just flat on the backside. And so that kind of just got me using this more normally, essentially, just with these attached to the Switch 2 when I'm sitting on the couch or sitting on my on my chair in my living room or something. Now, one thing I do want to highlight. So with the case itself, you do have a stand. Now, I just mentioned how I typically would take these off and put them onto the actual docking station, or controller docking station is what I'm going to call it, for the Joy-Cons. But oftentimes I'd make use of the kickstand. However, now that I don't really have to do that because I find these very comfortable, I don't really find a reason to use the stand. However, if you do decide that that is what you want to do, or you want to use your Pro controller and use the stand, I will mention that this doesn't seem to have the same degree of angling as the actual Switch 2's stand does, if that makes sense. In other words, this sits a little deeper than the Switch 2's. Not a major complaint, but it is something that might be worth considering if you want this very straight up and down when you're playing your games. But those are minor concerns. They're not major issues overall. One of the things that I highlighted at the intro of this video is that the COOWPS P2 solves a lot of conventional issues that come with having a Switch case. And one of the main issues that I've seen online, and I've just seen looking at different Amazon reviews of other alternatives, is that you can't dock your Switch 2 normally without some sort of workaround or external wire or something that basically removes the original Nintendo Switch 2 dock out of the picture, or just doesn't dock at all in any way. And this solves that by having a proper slim enough design that this fits neatly into the dock. And the Switch 2 dock itself has a bit of space already, and it feels like this was perfectly designed to fill that extra space perfectly. So when you slot this in, it feels like it was essentially meant to be, which I thought was perfect for what I'm going to use and how I'm going to keep my Switch 2 moving forward. Now, one thing I do want to emphasize though is so far this device is solid, and there's a lot of really great things about this device. But there is one flaw with the detachable Joy-Con portion that I think is really worth mentioning. And while I like the grips, and I like how these feel on the backside of the Switch 2, they come off very easy if you're holding it from the side, which might not seem like a big issue, but I almost completely dropped this flat on its face yesterday because I was picking this up from the side off the couch, and this slid off very, very easily. And you can kind of see me dropping it here. It doesn't take much effort for this to come off if you're holding it from the side. Holding it like this, it does not come off. Holding it like this, it slides off incredibly easy. So much so that I'm not going to demonstrate it at this point again, because I will smash my Switch 2 on the floor. That to me is probably the biggest flaw of this device. And granted, you know that going in, and you know that about the way these attach to the Switch 2, I think you're gonna be fine. Me personally, I think this is generally a non-issue. It just was something that threw me off yesterday and gave me a bit of a panic moment when I was like, oh boy, I think my Switch 2 is gonna fall. It's just something worth considering if you are looking at an alternative to what else is out there on the market. The final piece to this device that I think is, in my opinion, probably one of the best features of this device is that it has a detachable clamshell cover. And that basically turns this into a proper travel case. And it doesn't just have a cover, it also has foam inserts inside the cover that don't just protect the Switch 2, but they also allow you to store your game cards inside this case. So in other words, the $10 travel case that I purchased a couple months ago, that some of you may have seen the review on this channel, is essentially no longer needed. This thing basically is all in one. The only downside is it would be cool if there was kind of some sort of internalized piece that I could, snug a little USB-C wire or something, but that's just me nitpicking. Overall, this simplifies my travel use tenfold and protects the Switch 2. And I've tested it in putting it inside my travel bag and basically seeing how it responds inside there. And overall, I'm very comfortable using this whole entire kit essentially, or this whole entire case design as a full unit, and using this for a long travel. And in a week or so, I'm gonna be going to the Dominican, and I fully intend on just bringing this with a external USB-C charger to the Dominican with me, with my games inside the case and everything. And I'm very confident and comfortable that this will be properly protected for the entirety of my flight, as well as when I get there. So overall, I just want to say I'm quite impressed with this case set. I'm calling it a set because it comes in multiple pieces, but I'm very impressed with this. Yes, there are some flaws there, and in my opinion, these are generally minor flaws, but all of the pros outweigh the cons here. And what I mean is, you have a very comfortable grip design for this case. You have, and what I feel like is a very durable case itself. You also have that clamshell case that eliminates the need for an external traveling case for this as well, which makes this, in my opinion, a proper all-in-one solution for using your Switch 2 both at home and on the road and traveling, and using it basically anywhere. And for a lot of people like myself, this is the perfect case for that sort of, for the type of person that I am, who's going to intentionally use my Switch 2 for traveling for long durations and want to keep this expensive gaming device protected. So if you're in the market for a high quality, good quality case that solves a lot of the fundamental issues that come with Switch 2 cases or Switch cases in general, I think that you can't go wrong with the COOWPS P2 protective multi-case.